The Thornback had already killed 2 handlers by the time Kale pressed her face against the gap in the cargo hold's blast shutter and watched the human walk toward it with his hands in his pockets. She was 9 cycles old, and she had never seen anything like him. Not the species she had read about humans in her academy primers, filed alongside other Class 12 Deathworld exports in the xenobiology texts her mother made her study. What she had never seen was the walk. Every living thing on the convoy had spent the last 6 days giving the Thornback's holding cage a wide berth, pressing themselves against the opposite hull wall whenever they had to pass through the cargo deck. The beast weighed 4,000 kilograms. Its dorsal ridge of black bone spurs rose half a meter above its spine. Its forelimbs ended in hooked talons that could peel starship plating like fruit skin, and its jaws Kale had seen those jaws close around a handler's torso and twist. The human walked toward those jaws the way her father used to walk toward breakfast. His name was Mace. She had learned that from the manifest her mother had argued over with the convoy quartermaster when the refugee ship limped out of the Varath corridor with its port engine dark and its water reserves at 11%. He was listed as a cargo specialist. No rank, no military file, no species annotation beyond the standard H-12 Deathworld tag that made the Brevari customs officers stamp his papers without meeting his eyes. He was somewhere past 40 standard years, with a jaw that needed shaving, sun-creased lines at the corners of his eyes, and hands that looked like they had spent decades gripping things heavier than weapons. Kale watched him stop 3 meters from the cage. The Thornback swung its massive head toward him. Its amber eyes, each the size of Kale's fist, locked onto his silhouette. The cargo hold fell silent except for the low hum of the failing atmospheric scrubbers and the wet, rhythmic click of the beast's breathing plates opening and closing along its throat. Mace tilted his head. "Hey," he said. The Thornback lunged. Its skull hit the containment bars with a sound like a hull breach alarm, and the entire cage lurched sideways on its maglocks. Kale flinched back from the shutter gap. 3 Brevari crew members bolted from the far end of the hold, their boot claws clattering on the deck plates. An alarm shrieked from the cage's stress monitor. A 4th crew member, an engineering tech named Pollock's apprentice, still raw from watching his mentor die, vomited against the bulkhead. When Kale pressed her face back to the gap, the human had not moved. He stood in the same spot, hands still in his pockets, looking at the Thornback the way someone might look at a door that was stuck. Not afraid, not aggressive, just considering. "All right," he said quietly, "we'll try again tomorrow." He turned and walked away. The Thornback watched him go. It did not lunge again. Kale did not sleep that night. The refugee convoy, 4 ships lashed together by emergency docking clamps after the Varath ambush had scattered the original fleet, was 3 days into what should have been a 6-day crossing of the Ashenmaw, the dead expanse between the Varath corridor and the nearest Allied station at Pelori. The ambush had damaged the lead ship's navigation array. The convoy was drifting on manual corrections through a region of space that ate sensor pings and gave nothing back. Water was rationed. Power was rationed. Hope was running out faster than either. And the Thornback was the only thing standing between them and what waited in the Ashenmaw. Kale understood this, even though the adults would not explain it to her. She understood it because she listened at ventilation grates and because her mother, Liaison Commander Yevra of the Brevari Diplomatic Corps, talked in her sleep. The ambush in the Varath corridor had not been random. The convoy was being herded. Something out there, her mother called them, the Pale, was driving the refugees deeper into the Ashenmaw, where the comm relays were dead and no patrol would hear a distress call. The Thornback had been captured on Varath Prime specifically as a war asset, meant for delivery to the Allied garrison at Pelori. It was supposed to be trained and deployed against the Pale's ground forces. But its handlers were dead. Its training had never been completed, and the cage's power cells were failing along with everything else on the convoy. Kale lay in her bunk that night and listened to the ship breathe. the wheeze of atmospheric scrubbers working past their rated hours, the creak of emergency docking clamps under torque stress, the distant subsonic thrum that came through the deck plates from the cargo hold 2 decks below. That thrum was the Thornback. Even locked in its cage, even still, its heartbeat was massive enough to vibrate through hull plating and structural dampening. She pressed her ear to the bunk frame and listened. The rhythm was slow, steady, ancient. It sounded like something that had existed before starships and would exist long after the last one rusted into dust. In the bunk above her, her mother turned in her sleep and muttered convoy headings that no longer matched any chart. Cale pulled her blanket tighter and thought about the human, about the way he had stood perfectly still while 4,000 kilograms of armored predator tried to bash its skull through the bars to reach him, about the way he had said, "all right," with the same inflection her father had used when a tool did not fit the first time, patient, unhurried, already planning the second attempt. She had seen grown breviary officers cross to the far side of the corridor when they had to pass the Thornback's hold. She had seen Quartermaster Dren reroute supply runs through 2 extra decks rather than walk past the cage. She had watched the engineering crew draw lots to decide who had to check the power coupling on the cage's containment field, and she had watched the loser walk the length of the cargo deck with his back pressed to the opposite wall, hands shaking, while the Thornback tracked him with unblinking amber eyes. The human had walked straight toward it, hands in pockets, and when it lunged he had not moved. Cale did not understand that yet, but she wanted to. Before dawn she heard footsteps in the corridor outside, quiet, deliberate, the unhurried stride of someone used to moving through dark spaces without waking anyone. She recognized them. Mace. He passed the quarters she shared with her mother and kept going, heading aft toward the cargo deck. She heard the soft thunk of the hold's manual door latch, and then the footsteps faded. She counted to 100, then she slipped out of her bunk and followed. The next morning Cale trailed the human back to the cargo hold. She kept to the upper maintenance crawlway, pressing herself flat against the conduit housing, watching through a ventilation grill set into the deck above the cage. Mace sat cross-legged on the floor 4 meters from the bars. He had brought something with him, a ration block, the compressed nutrient paste the convoy distributed twice a day. He broke it in half and set 1 piece on the deck between himself and the cage. The Thornback watched him from the far side of its enclosure. Its dorsal spurs were flat against its spine. Cale recognized that from her xenobiology primer as a non-threat posture, though the primer also noted that a Thornback could shift from flat spine to killing strike in less than a second. Mace ate his half of the ration block. He chewed slowly. He did not look directly at the Thornback. He looked at the bulkhead to his left, at the flickering status lights on the cage's power coupling, at the deck plates under his knees. His body was perfectly still except for the small motion of his jaw. The Thornback's breathing plates clicked. Open, closed, open, closed. After 10 minutes, Mace stood up, left the remaining half block on the deck and walked out. The Thornback waited until his footsteps faded. Then it pressed its massive snout between the bars, extended a tongue the width of Cale's forearm, and took the ration block. Cale felt something shift in her chest. She did not have a word for it yet. That afternoon, the convoy's lead ship lost its remaining navigation sensor. The 4 ships began to drift. Cale's mother called an emergency council in the mess hall of Ship 2, and Cale sat under the table with her knees drawn to her chest, listening to voices she had known her whole life break apart with fear. "We have approximately 31 hours of breathable atmosphere at current consumption," said Quartermaster Dren, his gravelly voice flat with the discipline of a man who had been rationing bad news for a week. "Water for 18. The Ashenmaw's interference field is degrading our hull seals. If we do not reach the beacon line within 2 days, we will not reach it." "The Thornback," said Subcommander Torrell. "If we vent the cargo hold, we save 6 hours of atmosphere." "The Thornback is a strategic asset," Kale's mother said. Her voice carried the clipped precision that meant she was angry and trying not to show it. Pelori Garrison specifically requisitioned. Pelori Garrison is not here, Toril said. We are, and that thing killed handlers Shev and Pollock. Because Shev struck it with a shock prod while it was eating, the beast defended itself. It tore him in half, liaison commander. A silence. Kale pulled her knees tighter. She could see Toril's boots polished despite everything, because Toril was the kind of officer who would polish his boots at the heat death of the universe. Then another voice, quieter, flatter, sitting somewhere near the wall. I can handle the animal. Kale recognized the voice. Mace. Every head in the room turned. She could see their boots shifting under the table's edge. You're a cargo specialist, Toril said. The way he said it made it clear he had checked the manifest and found nothing impressive. I am, Mace said. The Thornback killed 2 experienced beast handlers. They weren't experienced with Thornbacks. Nobody is. The species was uncontacted until Verath Prime. The handlers were using standard apex predator protocols, dominance displays, shock conditioning, food deprivation. Those methods work on creatures that operate on social hierarchy. A pause. Thornbacks don't have a social hierarchy. They're solitary apex hunters. Dominance displays don't intimidate them. They provoke them. And you would do what differently? Kale's mother asked. Sit with it, May said. Share food, let it decide. Toril made a sound that was half laugh and half the breviary equivalent of a profanity. Let it decide. The 4,000-kilogram killing machine with hooked talons and a jaw pressure that can breach hull plating. Let it decide. Yes, May said. That's how it works. Your qualifications for this assessment are: grew up on a deathworld ranch. We had predators bigger than your shuttlecraft come through the fence line every spring. You don't fight them. You don't scare them. You sit on the porch and let them figure out you're not food and not a threat. The ones that figure it out stay. The ones that don't move on. Nobody gets hurt. And if this one doesn't figure it out, Toril pressed, if it decides the cargo specialist is food, then you're down 1 cargo specialist and you still have a Thornback problem. But you won't have lost anything you weren't already going to lose. That shut the room down. Kale could feel the silence pressing against the underside of the table. He's right, Dren said finally. His voice carried the weary pragmatism of a man who had been counting losses since the Verath ambush. We don't have another option. The handlers are dead. The cage is failing. In approximately 14 hours, the containment field drops permanently, and we have a loose Thornback in the corridors regardless. Either the humans' approach works, or we're dealing with a loose Thornback that's been shocked, starved, and provoked. I know which scenario I prefer. The council voted to give him 3 days. Toril voted against. Kale's mother abstained, which Kale knew meant she agreed but could not say so publicly. The council also voted to cut ration blocks by 1/3, reroute auxiliary power from the heating system to life support, and begin emergency hull patches on Ship 4's starboard seals. That night, the temperature in the living quarters dropped by 8 degrees. Kale pulled her blanket around her shoulders and listened to the children in the next compartment whimper in their sleep. Mother, she said, do you think the human can do it? Yevra did not look up from the datapad she was writing undeliverable dispatches on. The human is an unknown variable in a situation with too many unknowns already. That's not what I asked. Her mother's stylus stopped. She looked at Kale with the expression that meant she was about to say something honest and wished she did not have to. The handlers tried to dominate the Thornback. They used force and pain. The creature responded with greater force and greater pain. The human proposes to use neither. She paused. Either his approach is correct and the handlers died for nothing, or his approach is wrong and we lose him too. I do not know which outcome is more disturbing. On the second morning, Kale stopped hiding in the crawlway and sat in the cargo hold doorway instead. She was close enough to see the texture of the Thornback's armored hide, black and gray plates overlapping like ancient stone, slick with the thin oil its skin secreted to regulate temperature. Close enough to see the individual serrations on its talons. Close enough to hear the deep, subsonic thrum that vibrated in her sternum when the beast exhaled. Mace noticed her. He did not tell her to leave. He sat in his usual spot, 4 meters from the bars, ration block broken in half, his piece in his hand, the beast's piece on the deck. Today, the Thornback did not wait for him to leave. It came to the bars while he was still sitting there, its massive head lowered, the tongue extended. The ration block disappeared. Cale held her breath. The Thornback's amber eye, enormous, ancient, utterly alien in its depth, slid from Mace to Cale and back. Its breathing plates clicked steadily. "Why doesn't it attack you?" Cale asked. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Because I haven't given it a reason to," Mace said, without turning around. The handlers didn't think they gave it a reason either. The handlers thought it was beneath them. An animal to be controlled. He broke another small piece from his ration block and set it on the deck, closer to the bars this time. A Thornback can smell cortisol, stress hormones from 50 meters. It can read micro-expressions in species it's never encountered before. It knew the handlers were afraid of it. It knew they wanted to dominate it. And it decided that anything afraid of it and trying to control it was a threat. "But you're not afraid." Mace looked at her then. He had a weathered face, the kind that looked like it had been left out in several different kinds of weather on several different planets. "I am," he said, "but I don't need it to be less than what it is. I just need it to know I'm not a threat." "How does it know?" "Same way you knew I wasn't going to yell at you for sitting in the doorway. Body language, scent, patience, the fact that I keep coming back." The Thornback made a sound Cale had never heard before, a low, resonant chord, like a struck bell heard through water. Its dorsal spurs rippled once and lay flat. Its massive body settled onto the cage floor, and its chin came to rest on its forelimbs, its amber eyes half-lidded, still watching the human. "What was that sound?" Cale whispered. "That," Mace said, "was acknowledgement." That afternoon, Mace came back for a second session. This time he brought 2 ration blocks. He sat in his usual spot and broke one in half as before. But the second block he placed differently, not between himself and the cage, but beside his own knee, close, within reach. The Thornback watched. Its amber eyes tracked the second block. It came to the bars and took the first offering as before. Then it waited. Its breathing plates clicked in a rhythm Cale had not heard before, slower, steadier, almost contemplative. Mace picked up the second block and held it in his open palm. He extended his hand toward the bars, not through them, just near them, his arm steady, his breathing even. Cale stopped breathing entirely. The Thornback lowered its head. Its snout came through the bars slowly, centimeter by centimeter, the massive skull pressing between 2 containment rods that groaned under the pressure. Its tongue extended and curled around the ration block, but it did not pull away immediately. Its snout rested there, centimeters from Mace's open hand, and its breathing plates clicked once, twice, 3 times, then it withdrew. Mace's hand had not trembled, not once. "That's new," he said, to no one in particular. He was smiling. It was a small smile, barely visible, the kind that lived mostly in the creases around his eyes. But it was real, and Cale, watching from the doorway, felt it land in her chest like a small, warm stone dropped into still water. Cale came back that evening. She brought her own ration block, half of her already reduced daily allotment, which meant she would go to sleep hungry, but she did not think about that. She sat in the doorway again, but this time she broke off a small piece and set it on the deck, the way she had watched Mace do. The Thornback's amber eye opened. It looked at the piece of ration block. It looked at Cale. Its breathing plates clicked once, a quick double click that her primer did not have an entry for. "That means curiosity," May said from his spot by the bars. He had not left. It's interested in you. Should I be worried? No, it's already decided you're not a threat. You've been watching from the crawlway for 2 days. It knew you were there every time. If it considered you a threat, it would have been agitated the whole time I was sitting with it. Cale looked at the Thornback. The Thornback looked at Cale. For a moment, the cargo hold was perfectly silent, no scrubber hum, no stress alarm, no boot claws on deck plates. Just a child and a predator, studying each other across a gap that was measured in meters but felt like something else entirely. The Thornback's tongue extended. It took Cale's ration piece. Then it made the chord again, low, resonant, unmistakable. Acknowledgement. Cale's chest ached with something she still could not name, but she was beginning to suspect it was the feeling of being chosen. She stayed in the hold after Mace left for the evening. She sat in the doorway with her knees drawn up, watching the Thornback through the bars. The beast had settled into its resting configuration, chin on forelimbs, dorsal spurs flat, breathing plates clicking in their slow rhythm. But one amber eye remained open, watching her. I don't know what you are, Cale said quietly. My primer says you're a solitary apex hunter with no social cognition above territorial instinct. But my primer also says humans are a mid-tier omnivore species with no notable tactical advantages, and I watched one of them stand still while you tried to break through the bars to get to him. The Thornback's breathing plates clicked. 1, 2, 3. Its amber eye did not blink. I think the primers are wrong about a lot of things, Cale said. The beast made a sound, not the acknowledgement chord, something softer, lower, almost below the threshold of hearing. It rumbled through the deck plates and up through Cale's spine. She felt it in her chest cavity between her two hearts, and it resonated there like a second pulse. She sat with the Thornback until her mother came looking for her. Yevra appeared at the corridor junction with her hands on her hips, and her expression halfway between fury and the particular confusion of a parent who has found their child doing something inexplicable but not actually dangerous. Cale, it is past third quarter cycle. I'm watching the Thornback. I can see that. Why? Cale considered the question. She considered the Thornback, its amber eye still tracking her from behind the bars, its breathing plates clicking in that ancient rhythm. Because nobody else will, she said. Her mother stared at her for a long time. Then she turned and walked away, and Cale thought she heard the liaison commander mutter something that might have been deathworlders in a tone that contained multitudes. That night Cale dreamed of amber eyes and the sound of something massive and patient waiting in the dark. When she woke, the subsonic thrum was still vibrating through the deck plates, and she pressed her hand flat against the bunk frame and felt it pulse against her palm like a heartbeat, like a promise. On the third day, the Pale found them. Cale was asleep when the collision alarm screamed through the ship. She rolled out of her bunk and hit the deck running, bare feet slapping cold metal, her heart's hammering in her dual chest cavities. The corridor was full of bodies, Brevari crew members sprinting toward emergency stations, children being herded into the interior safe rooms, the acrid smell of overloaded wiring sharp in her nostrils. She found her mother at the bridge viewport of Ship 2. Liaison Commander Yevra's face was lit by the cold blue glow of the Ashen Maw, and in that glow, Cale saw what had triggered the alarm. 3 ships, long pale, wrong-looking, their hulls had no visible seams, no running lights, no markings. They looked grown rather than built, like bone formations shaped by something that understood engineering but had never heard of aesthetics. They were positioned in a triangle around the convoy, close enough that Cale could see the faint shimmer of their weapon arrays charging. Pale intercept formation, her mother said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. They will board within the hour. Can we fight? We have 17 small arms and 46 refugees, 30 of whom are children. We cannot fight. The corridor lights flickered. Somewhere below, a pipe joint blew and the sharp hiss of venting atmosphere cut through the alarm before an emergency seal slapped into place. Kale's stomach tightened. "What about the Thornback?" she asked. Her mother's jaw set. "The Thornback is in a cage. Its cage is failing. The power cells are at 12%. The containment field drops for seconds at a time, and Mace has been sitting with it for 3 days. It took food from his hand this morning, from my hand. It made the acknowledgement cord." Yevra looked at her daughter. Something shifted behind her eyes, the liaison commander calculating, running variables, weighing a possibility she would not have considered 48 hours ago. The acknowledgement cord. A low tone. "Mace says it means recognition. It sees you as not a threat, not prey, something else." "Something else," Yevra repeated. She was quiet for 3 heartbeats. Then she straightened and the liaison commander was back, the mother's uncertainty locked away behind diplomatic training. "Safe room. Now, I will handle this." Kale went to the safe room. She stayed for exactly 11 minutes, long enough for her mother to leave the corridor. Then she climbed out through the ventilation shaft she had mapped on the second day of the voyage and ran for the cargo hold. She heard Mace before she saw him. His voice carried through the ship's ventilation system, calm, unhurried, like a conversation with an old friend. "Easy, big guy. We're going to take a walk." Kale arrived at the hold entrance, just in time to see Mace standing inside the cage. The bars were open. The containment field was down, not flickering, not failing, but deliberately disengaged. The manual release panel on the cage's exterior showed green across every lock. The Thornback stood at its full height beside him, 4 meters of armored, taloned, apex predator, its dorsal spurs raised halfway, its breathing plates open wide, its amber eyes reflecting the red emergency lighting. And Mace had his hand on its neck, just resting there on the thick armored plate above the beast's shoulder, the way someone might rest a hand on the shoulder of a friend. Kale's legs went weak. She grabbed the doorframe. The Thornback's gaze swept to her and held. She felt the weight of it, not malice, not hunger, but something vast and ancient and evaluating, like being looked at by a mountain that had decided whether or not to fall on you. "Stay right there," Mace said. "Don't run. Don't flinch, just be still." Kale was still. She was so still she could feel her own pulse in her teeth. The Thornback studied her for 3 seconds that lasted a year. Then its dorsal spurs flattened. Its breathing plates clicked to their resting rhythm, and it made that sound again, the low, resonant chord. "Acknowledgement." "She's with us," Mace said quietly. He was not talking to Kale, he was talking to the Thornback. The beast's massive head dipped once, barely perceptible, and it turned away from Kale to face the cargo hold's forward corridor. The plan was simple because there was no time for a complex one. The Pale would board through Ship 4's ventral airlock, the weakest point in the convoy's hull, already half compromised by ashen-maw corrosion. They would sweep through the connecting corridors, round up the refugees, and do whatever it was the Pale did with the people they collected. Nobody on the convoy knew exactly what that was. Nobody who had been taken by the Pale had ever come back to describe it. Mace walked the Thornback through the cargo hold, through the connecting corridor between Ship 2 and Ship 3, and into the ventral access junction of Ship 4. He walked slowly. The beast walked beside him, matching his pace, its massive body filling the corridor from wall to wall, its talons leaving deep gouges in the deck plates with every step. Its dorsal spurs brushed the ceiling conduits and left scrapes in the metal. The crew members they passed flattened against the walls. Some stopped breathing. Quartermaster Dren pressed himself into a storage alcove and held his hand over his mouth. A child began to cry and was immediately muffled by a parent's hand. Subcommander Torrell, stationed at the corridor junction between Ships 2 and 3, watched the Thornback pass within arm's reach and did not move, did not breathe, did not blink. A Tauren trader stumbled backward into a supply rack and sent crates tumbling. The crash echoed through the corridor. The Thornback's head snapped toward the sound with a speed that made the air pop. Every living thing in the corridor went rigid. Mace's hand stayed on the beast's neck. "Just crates," he said. "Nobody hostile." The Thornback's head swung back. It kept walking. Behind them, the Tauren trader sank to the floor and pressed all four of his hands over his face. In the connecting tunnel between ships 3 and 4, where the emergency docking clamps groaned under the convoy's drift torque and the atmospheric seals leaked thin wisps of freezing vapor, the Thornback paused. It turned its massive head toward the hull, pressed its snout against the plating, and held still. Its breathing plates opened wide. The subsonic thrum changed pitch higher, sharper, more focused. It was listening to something only it could sense. Mace waited. He stood in the freezing connector tunnel with frost forming on his jacket and his breath clouding, and watched the beast listen. After 10 seconds, the Thornback pulled its head from the hull and looked at Mace. Something passed between them that Cale would spend years trying to describe. The beast's amber eyes held the human's gaze, and in that held gaze was information, not language, not gesture, but something older and more direct. A predator telling a fellow predator, "They are close, and they are coming." Mace nodded once. "I know, let's go meet them." Cale followed. She stayed 15 meters behind, pressed against the corridor wall, moving when they moved, stopping when they stopped. Her mother would be furious. Cale did not care. Something was happening that she needed to see, not wanted, needed. They reached the ventral junction, a wide, low-ceilinged chamber where 4 corridors met at the ship's underbelly, centered on the ventral airlock. The heavy blast door already showed the blue-white glow of a cutting beam on its outer surface. The Pale were coming through. Mace led the Thornback to the center of the junction and stopped. He looked at the glowing airlock door. He looked at the Thornback. The beast was already facing the airlock. Its dorsal spurs had risen to full extension, half a meter of black bone, each one sharp enough to split hull plating. Its breathing plates opened wide, and the subsonic thrum deepened until Cale felt it in her bones, in her organs, in the roots of her teeth. Mace took his hand off the beast's neck and stepped back behind a structural support column. "Your call, big guy." The airlock door shrieked and buckled inward. 3 pale boarding soldiers came through the breach. They were tall, angular, clad in that same grown-not-built armor, and they moved with the fluid coordination of predators that had never encountered anything they could not overwhelm. Their eyes, flat, pale, without pupils, swept the junction. They saw the Thornback. The first one stopped so abruptly that the second collided with its back. The third raised a weapon. A beam emitter fused to its forearm and fired. The beam hit the Thornback's dorsal ridge and scattered like light through a prism. The beast's hide was rated against plasma discharge up to Class 7. The Pale weapon was, at most, a Class 4. The Thornback hit the first Pale soldier like a freight shuttle hitting a maintenance drone. 4,000 kilograms of apex predator, accelerating from standing to full charge in under 2 seconds. The sound was percussive, a deep, structural boom that traveled through the deck plates and up through Cale's shins. Its talons caught the soldier's chest armor and peeled it open the way a hand peels paper. The Pale soldier's feet left the deck. It traveled backward 3 meters and hit the airlock frame and did not get up. The second soldier tried to retreat through the breach. The beast's tail, a 3-meter club of armored muscle that Cale's primer had classified as a secondary impact weapon, in language far too clinical for what she was watching, swept its legs. The soldier hit the deck face first. The Thornback did not look back at it. It was already moving to the third, which had managed one more shot, another Class 4 beam that scattered off the dorsal ridge like rain off stone, before the jaws closed around its weapon arm and wrenched. The arm came free of its socket with a sound Cale would hear in her sleep for weeks. It was over in 6 seconds, 3 Pale soldiers down. The Thornback stood in the breach, filling the airlock opening with its massive body, its dorsal spurs raised, its breathing plates wide. And it roared. The sound went through the hull. It went through the deck plates and the bulkheads and the connecting corridors and the emergency shelters where 46 refugees crouched with their children. It went through the Ashenmaw's interference field. It went, Cale was certain, through the hulls of the 3 Pale ships. It was not a sound of rage, it was a declaration. This ship, these people, mine. May stood 6 meters behind the Thornback, his arms crossed, his expression the same mild, unhurried calm he wore on the cargo deck. Like the 4,000-kilogram apex predator guarding a breached airlock was a perfectly routine event. Behind Cale, in the corridor leading back to Ship 3, she heard running footsteps. She heard Dren shouting orders about emergency seals and atmospheric pressure. And underneath all of it, that subsonic thrum, steady as a star. Cale's mother found her then. Yevra came around the corridor junction at a run, sidearm drawn, 2 crew members behind her. She stopped dead when she saw the scene. "The boarding party has been neutralized," Mace said. He did not turn around. "I'd recommend sealing the corridors to ships 3 and 4 and venting the ventral section. The Thornback and I will hold the junction until the Pale withdraw or until we reach the beacon line." "You're going to stay here with that?" "Yes." "In a vented corridor, without atmosphere." Mace pulled a standard emergency breather from his belt rated for 4 hours. "I've got this." Yevra stared at the Thornback. The beast had turned its head from the breach and was watching the conversation. Its amber eyes moved from Yevra to Cale to Mace and back. Its dorsal spurs lowered 1 centimeter, just enough to signal that these people, specifically, were not targets. "That thing recognizes you," Yevra said. There was something in her voice that Cale had never heard, not fear, not awe, but something between them. "It recognizes everyone on this ship," Mace said. "It's been listening through the hull for days. It knows your heartbeats. It knows your voices. It knows which children cry at night and which ones don't." He looked at the Thornback. "It decided 2 days ago that this convoy was its territory." "Because you sat with it." "Because I let it decide." Yevra looked at Cale. Something passed between mother and daughter that did not require words, the recognition that the world they had been living in had rules they had not understood, and the rules had just been rewritten by a man who moved crates for a living. "Get to the safe room," Yevra said to Cale. Then quieter, "I will come for you, I promise." Cale left. She went halfway down the corridor, around the bend, and climbed into the maintenance crawlway above the junction. From there, she could see everything: the Thornback holding the breach, Mace leaning against the column, the emergency lighting casting everything in red. An hour passed. Mace sat down against the column and ate half a ration block. He set the other half on the deck. Without turning from the breach, the Thornback's tail swept backward, curled around the block and brought it to its mouth. The motion was casual, practiced, as if they had been sharing meals this way for years. 2 hours passed. Dren's voice crackled over the internal comm, reporting atmospheric levels down 9% from baseline. Hull seal status: 3 secondary seals in degraded state. Power reserves 12 hours at current draw. Water rationed to 80 milliliters per person per 6-hour cycle. Each report was worse than the last. But the Thornback held the breach, and the Pale did not come through again. Through the crawlway viewport, Cale watched the 3 Pale ships hold their triangle formation. They were not retreating. They were not advancing. They were doing something worse: they were being patient. Cale understood patience now. She had watched Mace practice it for 3 days, sitting on a cargo deck floor, sharing ration blocks with something that could have killed him faster than he could blink. The Pale were practicing a different kind of patience, the cold kind. The kind that waited for the prey to weaken. But the prey had changed. The prey had 4,000 kilograms of apex predator standing in its doorway, and the apex predator had a human leaning against a column behind it, reading a datapad, as unhurried as a man on a park bench. 3 hours passed. Mace stood up and walked to the breach. He stood beside the Thornback and looked out through the torn airlock into the void beyond. The Ashenmaw's interference field shimmered blue-black against the distant starfield. The three pale ships hung in it like pale bones in dark water. The Thornback turned its head and looked at Mace. Its breathing plates clicked in a slow, steady pattern. Mace reached up and put his hand on the beast's jaw. The Thornback did not flinch. It leaned into the touch, the way a creature leans into something it has decided to trust, and its breathing plates clicked twice in that slow rhythm Kale had come to recognize as contentment. "They're waiting us out," Mace said. He was not talking to Kale. He was not talking to anyone on the comm. He was talking to the Thornback. "They figure we run out of air before they run out of patience." The Thornback's amber eyes narrowed. Its dorsal spurs twitched, not the full extension of a threat display, but a subtle oscillation, like antennae parsing a frequency only it could hear. It pressed its snout against the torn airlock frame and held still. The subsonic thrum shifted again, sharper, more focused, a predator reading the void the way a sailor reads the wind. From the crawlway, Kale watched Mace watch the beast. She saw the moment something changed in his expression, a tightening around his eyes, a stillness that went deeper than his usual calm. He had read something in the Thornback's posture that she could not. "How many?" he asked. The Thornback's breathing plates opened and closed in a rapid pattern. 6 clicks, pause, 6 clicks, pause, 6 clicks. Mace exhaled through his nose. 18, 3 ships, 6 each, full boarding complement. He keyed his comm unit. "Liaison Commander Yevra." Static, then her mother's voice, clipped and controlled. "Go ahead." "The Pale are staging a second wave. 18 soldiers across all 3 ships. They're going to hit us from multiple breach points simultaneously." The ventral airlock was a probe. They wanted to see what we had. "How do you know the count?" "The Thornback told me." A pause that lasted 3 heartbeats. "Repeat that." "Ma'am, this animal can sense individual biosignatures through hull plating at range. It's been reading the Pale ship since they arrived. 6 per ship. They're moving to breach positions now. You have maybe 15 minutes. In the silence that followed, Kale heard her mother make a decision. She heard it in the quality of the quiet, the particular silence of a diplomat abandoning diplomacy for something rower. "What do you need?" Yevra asked. "Get every refugee into the interior safe room on Ship 2. Seal all connecting corridors except the main dorsal spine between Ships 1 and 4. I need the Thornback to be able to move the full length of the convoy without obstruction. You want to give a Thornback free run of the corridors. I want to give it a patrol route. It already knows who belongs here. It's been listening to every heartbeat on this convoy for 3 days. Anyone who doesn't have a recognized heartbeat is a target. And the children. There are 30 children on this convoy. The children are exactly why it will fight." Mace's voice was quiet but absolute. "This animal has been cataloging every heartbeat on this ship. The small ones, the ones that beat fast and scared in the dark, those are the ones it hears loudest. It decided 2 days ago that those heartbeats belong to it, not to us, to it." Kale felt something crack open in her chest. She thought of the subsonic thrum she had felt through her bunk frame every night, the massive heartbeat that vibrated through 2 decks of hull plating. She had thought the Thornback was simply existing, breathing, being. She had not understood that it was listening. That every night, while 46 refugees slept in their bunks, a 4,000-kilogram apex predator had been lying in the dark, pressing its body against the deck and counting their heartbeats like a shepherd counting sheep. "Do it," Yevra said. "All personnel to Ship 2 safe room, dorsal spine corridors open, everything else sealed." A pause. "Mace." "Ma'am." "If this goes wrong." "It won't." "If it does, my daughter is somewhere she shouldn't be. She's in the maintenance crawlway above the ventral junction." I have known this for the last 40 minutes. Get her to the safe room. Mace looked up at the crawlway grill. His eyes found Cale's through the metal lattice. He did not look surprised. Copy that. The comm clicked off. Mace looked at the Thornback. The beast was already moving, pulling its massive body from the breach, turning in the corridor with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something its size. Its talons found purchase on the deck plates, and it moved toward the corridor junction, toward the dorsal spine that ran the length of the convoy like a vertebral column. Cale, Mace said, "Come down." She climbed out of the crawlway. Her hands were shaking and she could not make them stop. Mace looked at her the way her father used to look at her when she had done something dangerous, and he was deciding whether to be angry or proud. He settled on neither. He settled on practical. "Walk behind me, stay within 2 meters. Do not run no matter what you hear. The Thornback knows you. It will not hurt you. But if you run, its hunting instinct will trigger before its recognition does. Walk." She walked. Mace walked ahead of her, and the Thornback moved ahead of them both, filling the corridor, its dorsal spurs brushing the ceiling, its breathing plates open wide and reading the air. They moved through the connecting tunnel between ships 4 and 3, the same tunnel where the beast had pressed its snout to the hull and listened. Now it did not pause. It moved with purpose, with the unhurried certainty of something that had mapped its territory and was now patrolling it. In the corridor of Ship 3, they passed the first sealed bulkhead. Behind it, Cale could hear the muffled sounds of refugees being herded toward Ship 2, boot claws on metal, the low murmur of frightened voices, a child crying. The Thornback's head turned toward the sound of the crying child. Its breathing plates clicked in a rapid pattern and then slowed. The subsonic thrum deepened, a bass note that traveled through the bulkhead, and Cale was certain reached the child on the other side. The crying stopped. She imagined the child pressing a small hand to the bulkhead and feeling that vibration, that massive, steady pulse, and being soothed by it without understanding why. They reached the dorsal spine junction of Ship 2. Mace stopped. He put his hand on the Thornback's flank high up, near the dorsal ridge, where the armored plates were thickest. The beast turned its head and looked at him. "All right," Mace said. "This is your ship. These are your people. Go to work." The Thornback held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then it turned and moved down the corridor, not toward Ship 1, not toward Ship 4, but toward the safe room, toward the place where 46 refugees and 30 children were huddled in the dark, waiting for whatever came next. Cale watched it go. The beast moved through the corridor like water through a channel, its massive body flowing around corners and through junctions without slowing. And as it moved, it made a sound, not the roar, not the acknowledgement chord, but something else. Something Cale had never heard. A low, continuous rumble that traveled through the deck plates and the bulkheads and the hull itself, spreading through the entire convoy like a second heartbeat laid over the first. It was deeper than the thrum she had felt through her bunk. It was deliberate. It was communication. It was telling them, all of them. Every refugee pressed against a bulkhead in the dark, every child curled under a blanket, every crew member gripping a sidearm with shaking hands. It was telling them, "I am here. I am between you and what comes. Be still." "Safe room," May said to Cale. "Now go." She ran. She broke his rule about not running, and she ran, because the sound the Thornback was making had reached something deep in her biology, something older than thought, older than language, something that recognized the rumble of a massive predator claiming its territory, and responded with the imperative to be inside that territory, not outside it. She ran toward the safe room because every cell in her body understood that the safest place on the convoy was wherever the Thornback had decided to stand. She reached the safe room door just as the first hull breach siren screamed through Ship 1. The pail came through in 3 places at once: Ship 1's dorsal airlock, Ship 3's starboard emergency hatch, Ship 4's ventral breach, where they had tested the waters an hour before. 18 soldiers in bone-white armor, moving in coordinated 6-unit cells, sweeping through the corridors with the fluid efficiency of predators who had done this hundreds of times before. They had not done it with a Thornback in the corridors. Cale heard the first contact through the safe room's hull, a sound she would carry for the rest of her life. Not the Thornback's roar. Something worse. A sound like tearing metal and breaking stone, and the wet percussion of 4,000 kilograms of armored muscle hitting something at full velocity. It came from Ship 1's dorsal section, which meant the Thornback had covered the distance from Ship 2 to Ship 1's breach point in under 30 seconds through corridors, around corners, through a connecting tunnel, at a dead sprint. The safe room shook. The lights flickered. Around Cale, 46 refugees pressed together in the dark. Children clung to parents. Parents clung to each other. Quartermaster Dren stood at the door with a sidearm he did not know how to fire, his jaw set, his hands steady for the first time since the Verath ambush. Through the hull, the sounds came in bursts. The Thornback was not staying in one place. It was running the convoy's dorsal spine like a circuit, hitting each breach point, engaging the pale soldiers, and moving before they could coordinate against it. The sounds traveled through the deck plates in a pattern Cale could track impact and roar from Ship 1's bow, then silence, then 30 seconds of nothing, then impact and roar from Ship 3's starboard section, then silence again, then the massive percussive boom from Ship 4's ventral junction. It was running a patrol route, exactly as Mace had described. It was moving through the corridors of the convoy the way it would move through its territory on Verath Prime, a circuit, a perimeter check, a predator making sure every approach to its den was clear. And between the impacts, between the roars, that deep continuous rumble never stopped. It traveled through the hull and the deck plates and the bulkheads, and Cale felt it in her sternum, between her two hearts, and she understood what it meant because she had been listening for 3 days, and because some things do not require translation. I am still here. I am still between you and them. Be still. Beside her, a Brevari child 4 cycles old, barely old enough to walk, pressed both hands flat against the deck and closed her eyes. Her tiny body relaxed. Her breathing steadied. She was listening to the Thornbacks rumble the way a child listens to a parent's heartbeat, and it was enough. It lasted 11 minutes. Cale counted every second. Then the sound stopped. The breach sirens fell silent one by one. Ship 4 first, then Ship 3, then Ship 1. The deck plates stopped shaking. The lights stabilized. And from somewhere in the convoy's dorsal spine, the Thornback's roar sounded one final time, not the territorial declaration of the first breach, but something longer, deeper, aimed outward through the hull and into the void. It was a warning, not to the refugees, to the Pale, and the message was the same as before but heavier now, weighted with evidence. This ship, these people, mine, come again and I will show you what that means. The comm crackled, Mace's voice calm, unhurried, as if he had spent the last 11 minutes reading a maintenance manual. Liaison Commander, boarding parties neutralized, all 3 breach points clear. The Thornback is holding position at the dorsal junction of Ship 2. No friendly casualties. I repeat, no friendly casualties. A beat of silence. Then Yevra's voice, stripped of its diplomatic veneer, raw in a way Cale had never heard from her mother. Status on the Pale Fleet. Withdrawing, all 3 ships breaking formation. The Thornback's last vocalization was aimed at their hulls. I think they heard it. You think they heard a roar through the vacuum of space. The Thornback's vocalizations operate partially in the subsonic range. Subsonic vibration transfers through hull contact points and docking structures. The Pale ships were close enough to receive it through their own plating. Another silence, then casualties among the Pale boarding force. 18 entered. 0 left. The safe room erupted. Not in cheers. Refugees who have spent a week being hunted do not cheer. They exhaled. They loosened their grip on each other. They let their shoulders drop and their hands unclench. A child laughed, a single, startled, involuntary laugh that rang through the compartment like a bell. And then another child laughed, and then a Brevari crew member made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob, and the room filled with the ragged, exhausted noise of people who had just realized they might survive. Kale did not make a sound. She sat against the bulkhead with her hands flat on the deck and felt the thornbacks rumble through her palms. It had changed again. The warning was gone. The territorial declaration was gone. What remained was the first sound she had ever heard from it, the deep, steady thrum that vibrated through hull plating and structural dampening. The heartbeat, slow, ancient, patient. It sounded like safety. They reached the Pelori beacon line 19 hours later. The convoy's lead ship picked up the first navigational ping at 0600, and by 0900 they were inside Allied comm range. Dren's distress signal brought 2 patrol cutters and a medical frigate within 4 hours. By midday, the convoy was surrounded by Allied ships, and the Ashenmaw was behind them, and the Pale were a sensor ghost fading into the interference field. Kale stood at the cargo hold observation window of Ship 2 and watched the Thornback. It had returned to the hold after the Pale retreated not to its cage, which stood open and powerless at the far end of the deck, but to the open floor where Mace had spent 3 days sitting with it. It lay in the center of the hold, chin on forelimbs, dorsal spurs flat, breathing plates clicking in their resting rhythm. Mace sat beside it, leaning against its flank the way someone might lean against a sun-warmed wall. He was asleep. His hand rested on the beast's shoulder plate, and the beast's tail was curled loosely around his back, holding him in place the way a parent's arm holds a sleeping child. Around them, at a respectful distance that was shrinking by the hour, the refugees had begun to gather, not all of them, not yet, but some. Quartermaster Dren stood in the hold doorway, watching with an expression that had traveled from terror through disbelief and arrived somewhere near reverence. Subcommander Toril, the man who had voted to vent the cargo hold and kill the Thornback 3 days ago, sat on a supply crate near the far wall, his polished boots planted on the deck, his hands clasped between his knees, watching the beast with the careful attention of a man revising every assumption he had ever held. The Brevari child, the Forsycolold, who had pressed her hands to the deck and listened, walked away from her parents, crossed the hold floor on unsteady legs, and sat down 3 meters from the Thornback. She was too young to understand what the beast was, too young to understand what it had done. She only knew what she had felt through the deck plates when the world was shaking, and the sirens were screaming that deep, steady rumble that told her to be still, that told her she was safe, that vibrated in the space between her ribs like a second heartbeat. The Thornback opened one amber eye. It looked at the child. Its breathing plates clicked twice. Its tail shifted, uncurling from Mace's back just enough to create a space, a gap, an invitation. The child crawled forward, settled against the beast's foreleg, and closed her eyes. Mace opened one eye, looked at the child, looked at the Thornback, and closed his eye again. He was smiling. The small one, the real one, that lived in the creases around his eyes. Kale watched from the observation window and felt the thing in her chest settle into place, the thing she had been carrying since the first morning in the cargo hold, the thing that had no name in her language. She tried to name it now. Trust. Recognition. The act of being chosen by something that could destroy you and knowing, in the marrow of your bones, that it never will. But those were approximations. The real word, she decided, was the one the Thornback had been speaking all along, not in language, not in gesture, but in the subsonic rumble that traveled through hull plating and deck frames and bunk rails, and pressed itself against the palms of sleeping children. Mine not as possession, not as dominance. Mine as in, I have heard your heartbeat in the dark, and I have decided it matters, and I will stand between it and anything that tries to make it stop. Her mother found her at the window. Yevra stood beside her daughter and looked at the scene in the cargo hold, the sleeping human, the resting beast, The child curled against its foreleg, the ring of refugees drawing slowly closer like planets settling into orbit around a new sun. The Pelori garrison commander has requested a full briefing on the Thornback's combat deployment, Yevra said. Sub-Commander Toril has submitted a revised tactical assessment recommending that all future War Beast training protocols be based on the humans' methodology. Sitting with it and sharing food. He phrased it more formally. But yes. Kale pressed her hand against the observation window. Through the glass and the deck and the hull, she could feel the Thornback's heartbeat. Slow, steady, ancient, hers. Mother, she said, my primer says humans are a mid-tier omnivore species with no notable tactical advantages. Your primer says many things. I think the primers measure the wrong things. They measure jaw pressure and claw length and venom toxicity. They rank species by how efficiently they kill. She watched Mace sleep against the Thornback's flank, his hand still resting on its shoulder plate, his breathing synchronized with the beast's own rhythm. They don't measure the thing that matters. And what is that? Kale thought about Mace walking toward the cage with his hands in his pockets. She thought about him sitting on the cargo deck floor, breaking a ration block in half, offering it on an open palm. She thought about him standing perfectly still while 4,000 kilograms of apex predator lunged at the bars. She thought about the word "all right" spoken with the patience of a man who had already planned his second attempt. She thought about the acknowledgement cord, and the child asleep against a forelimb that could peel starship plating, and the way a predator that had killed 2 handlers had chosen to stand in a corridor and fight for people it had never been trained to protect. The willingness to sit with something dangerous, Kale said, and let it decide you're worth trusting. Her mother looked at her for a long time. Then Liaison Commander Yevra of the Brevari Diplomatic Corps, a woman who had built her career on the precise deployment of words, said nothing. She put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, and they stood together at the observation window, and they watched the beast sleep with a human against its side and a child against its leg, and the convoy carried them toward Pelori, and the Thornback's heartbeat carried them all.